Question: can you say more about the different types? Psychology recognizes three basic types of functioning. The first is intellectual, or cognitive. The second is emotional, or emotive, and the third is active. Intellectual means one whose authentic urge is to know. He can stake his life for knowing. Someone working on poison can take poison just to know what happens. We cannot conceive of it. He looks stupid because he will die. What is the meaning of knowing a thing if you are going to die? What will you do with this knowledge? But then the intellectual type puts knowing above living, above life. To know is life for him, not to know is death for him. To know is his love, not to know is just to be useless. Socrates, Buddha, Nietzsche, they are in search of knowing what being is. What we are to them, this is basic. Socrates says an uncomprehended life is not worth living. If you don't know what life is, then it is meaningless. For us it may not look at all meaningful, the statement may not look meaningful at all. Because we go on living and we don't feel the need to know what life is. But this is the type who lives to know. Knowledge is his love. This type developed philosophy. Philosophy means love of knowledge, to know. The second type is emotive, to feel. For this type, knowledge is meaningless unless one feels it. Something becomes meaningful to them only when one feels it. One must feel it. Feeling is through a deeper center, the heart. Knowing is through the intellect. Poets belong to this category of feeling: painters, dancers, musicians. Knowing is not enough. It is just dry, it is without heart, heartless. Feeling is the thing. So an intellectual type can dissect a flower in order to know what it is. But a poet cannot dissect it. He can love it, and how can love dissect a flower? He can feel it. And he knows that only through feeling is the real knowing. So it may be that a scientist knows more about a flower. But still, a poet will never be convinced that the scientist knows more. A poet knows that he knows more, and he knows deeply. A scientist is only acquainted the poet knows from heart to heart. He has a talk with the flower heart to heart. He has not dissected it, he doesn't know what the chemistry of it is. He may not even know the name, to what species this flower belongs, but he says, I know the very spirit. Wei Hai, a Zen painter, was ordered by the Chinese emperor to paint some flowers for his palace. Wei Hai said, then I will have to live with flowers. But the emperor said, there is no need. In my garden every flower is there. You go and paint. Wei Hai said, unless I feel the flowers, how can I paint? I must know the spirit. And by eyes how can the spirit be known, and by hands? How can the spirit be touched? So I will have to live in intimacy with them. Sometimes with closed eyes, just sitting by their side. Just feeling the breeze that communicates, just feeling the scent that comes. I can be just in a silent communion with them. Sometimes the flower is just a bud, sometimes the flower flowers. Sometimes the flower is young and the mood is different. And sometimes the flower becomes old and death lingers nearby. And sometimes the flower is happy and celebrating. And sometimes the flower is sad. So how can I just go and paint? I will have to live with the flowers. And each flower that is born, one days will die. I must know that whole biography. I must live with a flower from its birth to death. And I must feel it in its many moods. I must know how it feels in the night when darkness is there. And how it feels in the morning when the sun has come up. And how, when a bird flies and a bird sings, how the flower feels then. How, when the storm winds come, and how when everything is silent. I must know it in its multiplicity of being intimately as a friend. As a participant, as a witness, as a lover. I must be related to it. Only then can I paint it, and then, too, I cannot promise, because the flower may prove such a vastness that I may not be capable of painting it. So I cannot promise, I can only try. 6 months passed, and the emperor became impatient. Then he said, where is that Wei Hai? Is he still trying to commune with the flowers? The gardener said, we cannot disturb him. He has become so intimate with the garden that sometimes we pass just nearby. And we cannot feel that a man is there. He has become just a tree. He goes on contemplating. 6 months had passed. The emperor went to Wei Hai and he said, "What are you doing? When will you paint?" Wei Hai said, "Don't disturb me. If I am to paint, I must forget about painting completely. So don't make me remember again, and don't disturb me. How can I live intimately with the flowers if there is some purpose? How is intimacy possible if I am just here as a painter and only trying to be intimate? Because I have to paint? What nonsense. No business deal is possible here, and don't come again. When the right time comes I will come to you myself, but I cannot promise. The right time may come or it may not come." For 3 years the emperor waited. Then Wei Hai came. He came into his royal court, and the emperor looked at him. He said, "Now don't paint. Because you have become just like a flower. I see in you all the flowers I have seen. In your eyes, in your gestures, in your movements. You have become just a flower." Wei Hai said, "I have come just to say that I cannot paint, because the man who is thinking to paint is no more. This is a different way, that of the emotive type who knows by feeling. For the intellectual type, even in order to feel he has to know first. He knows first, and then he can feel. His feeling also comes through knowing. Then there is a third type, active, a creative type. He cannot remain with knowing or feeling, he has to create. He can know only through creation. Unless he creates something, he cannot know it. Only through being a creator does he become a knower. This third type lives in action. Now what do I mean by action? Many dimensions are possible. But this third type is always action-oriented. He will not ask what life means, or what life is. He will ask, what is life to do? What is it for? What to create? If he can create, then he is at ease. His creations may differ. He may be a creator of human beings. He may be a creator of a society, he may be a creator painting, but creativity is there. For example, this Wei Hai, he was not an active type. So he dissolved himself into feeling totally. Had he been an active type, he would have painted. Only through painting would he have been fulfilled. So these are 3 types of functioning. Many things have to be understood. 1. I said that Buddha and Nietzsche both belong to the first type. But Buddha belongs rightly and Nietzsche belongs wrongly. If an intellectual type really develops, then he will become a Buddha. But if he goes on a wrong path, if he goes berserk and misses the point, he will not be a realized soul. Through knowing he will become mad. Through knowing he will not come to a deep trust. He will go on creating doubts. Doubts, and ultimately, trapped in his own doubts, he will just be insane. Buddha and Nietzsche both belong to the same type, but they are 2 extremes. Nietzsche can become a Buddha, and Buddha can become Nietzsche. If Buddha goes wrong, he will be mad. If Nietzsche goes right, he will be a realized soul. For the feeling type, one will name the Indian mystic Mira, and the Marquis de Sade. Mira belongs to the right kind of feeling type. If feeling goes right, it develops into a love of the divine. But if it goes wrong, then it becomes sexual perversity. De Sade belongs to the same type as Mira. But his feeling energies go wrong, and then he becomes just a perverted man, just abnormally insane. If the feeling type goes wrong, he becomes sexually perverted. If the intellectual type goes wrong, he becomes skeptically mad. And the third type of action, Hitler and Gandhi both belong to the third type. If it goes wrong, then a Hitler. Both belong to action. They cannot live without doing something. But doing can be just insane, and a Hitler is insane. He was doing, but the doing became destructive. If the active type goes right, then he is creative. If wrong, then he becomes destructive.